Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers. Let's sit around the campfire together and talk about Dead by Daylight. Specifically, the Dead by Daylight movie, that's just been announced in cooperation with Blumhouse and Atomic Monster Studios. I can't believe I've just said those words. Okay, when I first read this news, I thought, here's what I'll do. I'll give myself a 60-second timer, just to go crazy, go stupid, and give you my unfiltered, raw reaction to hearing this news. I've kind of held it in since I first read it, and now I'm going to give that to you. So, let me just set the timer, and go. Holy fucking shit! This is absolutely beyond precedent. This is nuts. This is a pipe dream I never even knew that I had. Well, I did kind of know that I had it. Let's not worry about that. This signifies an incredible new relationship between Behaviour and probably the biggest horror film studio out there right now, alongside one of my favourite directors of all time, one of the most impactful horror directors of the 21st century. This is fucking nuts, mate. This is crazy. My excitement for this is genuinely unparalleled. I am properly hyped for this. Like, I cannot even begin to tell you. This is everything I've wanted. This is so good. I don't know what they're gonna do with DBD's weird branching narratives and strange lack of central story, but I'm really excited to find out. Like, James Wan, man, this is brilliant. I'm so ungodly fucking gassed about this. And the time is up. Okay, so now that I've gone into my squee overhyped fanboy mode, it's time to take things a little bit more seriously and talk for a little bit about what the Dead by Daylight movie could look like, the characters and storylines it could choose to adapt, how it might want to do so, and maybe even a potential release window. So, yeah, that's what we're talking about today. Right, now that I've calmed down a little bit, let's talk about the announcement itself. DBD's website has the full press release, link in the description, and beyond the obvious there's a couple of clues that we could pick up on. Atomic Monster is James Wan's own studio, who has very recently undergone a merger with Blumhouse. While the two operate separately and have their own creative autonomy, they mutually benefit off of each other's manpower and infrastructure to make bigger and more diverse projects, including the recently announced Blumhouse gaming division, and presumably this movie, being co-developed by both studios, is a product of that merger. In addition, alongside Wan and Blum's involvement, various names are dropped. Stephen Mulrooney joins Wan and Blum in the producer's chair, and executive producers include Behaviour Interactive's Remy Racine, Atomic Monster's Michael Clear and Judson Scott, Blumhouse's Ryan Turek, and Striker Entertainment's Russell Binder. Notably, no directors or scriptwriters seem to be attached to the project yet, but let's look at the names that we do know. Stephen Mulrooney is a lead technical director at Behaviour, which seems like a kind of odd choice to put in the producer's chair, at least from the perspective of someone who doesn't know anything about the guy, but one name we do know is Remy Racine, the CEO of Behaviour Interactive, who's attached as an executive producer. The other names attached to the project get me very excited indeed. Michael Clear was a producer for Malignant and Megan, two movies from Atomic Monster that I absolutely adore. Ryan Turek was a producer for 2018's Halloween, Megan, The Black Phone, and many other projects by Blumhouse. And Russell Binder was a producer for Creepshow, and is attached to the upcoming Five Nights at Freddy's movie. But the interesting name for me here is Judson Scott. He's an actor who, as far as I know, hasn't had any producing roles so far, but that does mean we may have a prominent cast member here on our hands, right under our noses. Okay, so it turns out I was wrong about Judson Scott. Turns out there is a different Judson Scott, totally unrelated to the one that was on Star Trek. This Judson Scott seems to be the VP of film at Atomic Monster, which makes a lot more sense when we know the press release was referring to him as being part of Atomic Monster. So I made a slight error in my research earlier, and I do apologise, but I'm leaving that bit in just to confirm to everybody that this is not the Judson Scott who was in Star Trek. It's a different, totally unrelated Judson Scott. In my defence, it's not exactly a common name. Anyway, carry on. In any case, while the announcement has sparked a lot of hype at the moment, we should prep for the long haul in terms of waiting for things like preview footage, casting announcements and a release date. Assuming this is a consequence of the Blumhouse Atomic Monster merger that happened at the end of last year, this is probably the kind of announcement that was made while the ink on the legal agreements that movies these days are built on was still drying. If you are waiting for something like preview footage, don't expect anything until at least mid-2024, at least that's my guess. Because there's so much to do, and even assuming everything goes on schedule, and there's no guarantee it will, especially with Behaviour's involvement, it's a long way off if they haven't either announced a screenwriter or director yet. That being said, this long timescale doesn't necessarily preclude any positive short-term relationships between Blumhouse and Behaviour in the context of Dead by Daylight as a game. Because Behaviour, now being besties with the biggest horror studio in the world, has opened up a laundry list of possibilities. Blumhouse and Type Monster IPs, of which there are many, suddenly shoot to the top of the list of potential future license collaborations. That's The Conjuring, Megan, The Purge, and a little movie I like to call Malignant that I've already covered on the channel before, and is probably my dream license chapter for Dead by Daylight. Watch that video if you want to learn more about that fantastic movie. We also can't forget, Blumhouse was behind the new Halloween movies, so going back to Halloween is also far from impossible to get new cosmetics or content based on the new movies. Maybe a cosmetic choice for Old Man Michael, maybe Alison or Karen Strode, maybe even Old Laurie, with the likeness of Jamie Lee Curtis. After all this time, we could finally get a Laurie that looks like Jamie Lee. There is so much potential that's born from Behaviour working closely with Blumhouse and Type Monster, including FNAF, which also has a movie being produced by Blumhouse currently in the works, but I'll cover that another time. But enough about what we could get in Dead by Daylight in the nearer future, let's get back to the topic at hand, the movie, and the questions on everybody's minds is, what could it be about? Dead by Daylight is not like many horror games of old, like Resident Evil or FNAF, where the events in the story are linear and follow a single continued narrative structure. Instead, each chapter and new story is relatively self-contained with only vague allusions that it's actually going somewhere, and the closest we have to a long-running direct narrative being the stories of the Observer as he catalogues his time trapped in the entity's realm. There are many potential avenues that could go down to turn DBD's disparate collection of stories into a full movie. And honestly, I've always thought DBD would be at its best as an anthology TV series instead of a movie, but let's not look a gift horse in the mouth here. I'll be clear though, there's no guarantee anyone's favourite makes it in. We're sitting here at 30 plus original characters, even excluding ones that aren't playable like Otto Stamper and the Observer. There simply isn't enough room to have them all. But there's going to be at least some. I've had a few ideas about how the writers and producers could present these characters and stories in the movie. I'm going to break down my ideas into 3 loose routes I've thought about that they could end up taking. The Trial route, the Observer route, and the Black Veil route. They could go for a mixture of these, or they could go for none at all and do something completely different. This is just effectively my guesswork. The Trial route I think is the one everyone's talking about, and while it would definitely be a safest route to make an adaptation of DBD that's closest to the gameplay, I think it would be the least creatively interesting and probably make the weakest actual movie of all 3 of my ideas. The core concept is this. 4 people wake up around a campfire with no memories of how they got there or who anybody else might be. The only things they remember are nightmares of blood and violence at the hands of brutal killers. And as they share their nightmares with each other, they realise, in a very James Wan sort of twist, that they were all having the same nightmares. That these nightmares were real, repressed memories of the trials, and the movie culminates in yet another trial, which shows the horrors of the entity and its killers in all their bloody glory. This, I think, would be the cheap and easy way to do it. It wouldn't require any prior knowledge of the game's lore and story, and if anything, would be more effective if you didn't know it, meaning it would be more appealing to brand new viewers or players who haven't paid attention to the lore, and it'll let you use whatever survivors and killers you want, while keeping it broadly accurate to the gameplay. It would let Behaviour and the studios kinda have their cake and eat it. However, I fear it would risk doing many characters in the wider world of the entity a disservice, especially because the perspective of survivors only shows a very small sliver of the entity's world and the way it works. A wider scale view of the entity and how it works could be attained, however, in a movie centering around DBD's longest running continuous narrative, the story of the Observer. Consider the following. The Observer as our lead, hiding in his tower from the entity's predations, and it sends killers to remove him from his tower, something that has happened in Observer stories before. He's always used the power of the Aorist to protect himself, but say suddenly one day it fails, and a more menacing and intelligent killer than the bloodthirsty beasts of brutality the entity normally sends have broken into the tower and are hunting him down for the secrets of the Aorist and the documents in its possession. The Observer has to dive into the memories of survivors and killers alike to figure out how to either repair the Aorist or find some other weapon or tool to fight back against an intelligent and scheming killer who seeks the Observer's knowledge for his own devious ends. This, I think, could be a really strong narrative, a pseudo-multiverse type story where the Observer steps in and out of people's memories with a threat in hot pursuit, and could provide a lot of natural exposition as the observer answers questions about the way the entity's world works both to himself and to the audience that also wants to know. There is perhaps an inherent risk to an observer-based story though. The observer isn't a playable character, and his escapades are limited to the tomes, meaning he doesn't have the brand recognisability of the game's survivors or killers. This might make him less than marketable as a lead. That isn't something that Blumhouse is going to want. Nevertheless, I think if they were going to make a film adaptation of Dead by Daylight that plays into the game's few long-term narratives while giving the audience a solid whistle-stop tour of everyone's favourite survivors and killers at the same time, this would be a really solid way of doing that instead of trying to mimic the gameplay, like so many weak video game adaptations have done over the years. Take advantage of existing characters and their stories to build something new and creative that translates better to the big screen. Think more Arcane or Edge Runners and less Doom or Mortal Kombat. Now, I do like the idea of the Observer being a central character in DBD's eventual film adaptation, but it's worth remembering the Observer's just sort of vanished from the story, and did so a while ago with nothing to be heard from him since. Bring back a character whose story is for all intents and purposes told seems kinda backwards and antithetical to the way these films are often marketed. Hey, you've seen the movie, now come play the game where the main character has vanished from the story and has never been playable. Not exactly the greatest marketing strategy. This is where my third and favourite idea comes in, what I call the Chad route, or the Black Veil route. Because while the Observer's life is DBD's single longest and best known continuous narrative, it's not the only one, and in my opinion, isn't the best one. The Black Veil entity cult, first alluded to in an Observer story and making its debut in the Descend Beyond chapter, is a consistent force in the background of several characters' stories that manipulates events throughout history to their own interests and that of their Dark Master, as they choose sacrifices and victims to be delivered to it. The Black Veil is a constant threat that has appeared in several stories to date and is alluded to in many more. They are explicitly antagonistic in the stories of Blight, Felix, Elodie, the artist, Jonah and the twins, and their presence is implied in many others, so go with me on this journey. A story on Earth, outside the realm of the entity, where we follow a small team of characters who are aware of the entity's presence and involvement in the world, Elodie and Haddie for example, investigating overlaps between the entity's realm and our own, going to places like the Withered Isle, Dire Island, the Larry's Morgan Institute and others, crossing into the overlaps and finding killers whose lives were changed forever by the Black Veil's involvement, and eventually encountering the cult themselves, who've been pulling the strings for centuries and are ready to cut off any loose ends. There's so much they could do here. Maybe the Plague's followers who are saved from infection by the entity become the first Black Veil cultists. Maybe the temple that the knight seized the Lapis Paradisus from in his story was a Black Veil hideout from the start. Maybe they have connections with Mighty One Entertainment or Henry Bayshaw or whoever else, so you can follow Dead by Daylight's own paranormal investigations with characters we already know and love. This would require an immense amount of confidence in DBD's world building and storytelling, and would likely involve characters like Haddie, Elodie and Michaela as the main cast, as people who are aware of the entity's presence and know there's something greater at play, and whose investigations into the supernatural could draw the attention of the Black Veil. Of my three ideas, this is easily the most ambitious, but also possibly the one best suited to the studio that made the Conjuring movies. And it's an idea with a lot of possibilities and legs of potential sequels, as there's so many individual stories and characters that could be tied to the Black Veil, the pariahs and the overlaps. Mixing the characters and stories DBD players already know and love with new threads tying them together, and making the Black Veil an overarching threat to be dealt with as kind of the mortal hands of the entity, I think would create the most interesting final product, at least that I can think of. And if Blumhouse ends up using it in the final product, I am going to be extremely smug. Like, even smugger than I already am. Very, very smug indeed. And I think I deserve to be smug. Because this announcement by Blumhouse and Behaviour has confirmed basically everything I've always said since I started this channel. Dead by Daylight's lore and storytelling does matter. Its characters are important, and even if you don't think so, the biggest horror studio in the world and one of the greatest horror filmmakers of the 21st century clearly disagree. I feel absolutely vindicated and intensely excited by this announcement, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what they eventually decide to do. Well, that's everything I have to say for now about the announcement of the Dead by Daylight movie. And this was a quick one, but I've got a lot to do in the next few weeks. A new chapter is coming out, I've got the new video on Dead by Daylight Mobile in production, I've got the video on Symmetra that I promised to do, I've got so much on my plate. If you liked this video, or even disliked it, or just share my opinion that Lance Reddick should be cast as the Doctor, then by all means let me know in the comments, subscribe if you feel the need to, ring the little notification bell so you don't miss the next upload. As per usual, special thanks to all my beautiful patrons who make this possible and help keep the lights on at times like these. If you're interested in days early access to all my videos, the link to my Patreon is in the description. While I will never expect any contributions, I massively appreciate anyone who feels the need. You really are absolute heroes. And on that note, I guess I'll see you next time. Ta-ta for now.